The mechanic wiped his hands on a grease-stained rag, shook his head slowly, and said the words that made Marcus Holt's stomach drop straight to the floor. "Sir, this car isn't worth fixing. It's dead." Marcus stood in the parking lot of Greystone Auto Repair on a blinding Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where the sun mocks you with its brightness while your entire world quietly collapses. His 8-year-old daughter Zoe was sitting on the curb behind him, backpack on her lap, lunchbox balanced on her knees, watching her father with those wide brown eyes that always seemed to understand more than any child her age should ever have to. Marcus looked at the rusted 2003 Honda Accord that had carried him through 5 years of graveyard shifts, 2 crosstown moves, and every single school drop-off and pickup since his wife Renata passed away from a sudden aneurysm 3 winters ago. And right there, under that punishing Texas sun, he felt the ground beneath him turn to sand. If you've ever watched someone you love hold themselves together when everything around them is falling apart, then you already know what Marcus looked like in that moment. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Echoes the Stories, because every story we tell here is for someone who needs to hear it. Marcus was 34 years old and had the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. He worked as a warehouse supervisor at Caldwell Distribution, a mid-sized logistics company on the edge of Fort Worth. The job paid enough to cover rent, groceries, Zoe's school supplies, and little else. He drove 40 minutes each way, every single day, because the bus routes didn't reach their neighborhood until after his shift started. Without the car, he had no job. Without the job, he had nothing. The mechanic had estimated the repairs at just over $2,200, a transmission issue, a cracked axle, and a coolant leak that had been silently bleeding the engine dry for months. $2,200 might as well have been $22,000. Marcus had exactly $311 in his checking account, and payday was 9 days away. He called his supervisor, a hard-edged man named Pete, and explained the situation in a voice that barely held itself together. Pete told him company policy was company policy, and if Marcus couldn't find a way to work his shifts, they'd have to find someone who could. Marcus spent that entire Tuesday calling everyone he knew, his cousin in Dallas who was between jobs himself, a neighbor who worked nights and couldn't spare her car during the day, a church friend who had already lent him money the previous year and felt the silence of that conversation more than the words. By nightfall, Marcus had made 17 phone calls and found exactly 0 solutions. He sat at the kitchen table after putting Zoe to bed, his phone face down in front of him, and let out a long breath that had been building since morning. Zoe had left him a drawing on the table, a crayon picture of a man and a little girl standing next to a car with a big yellow sun overhead. Underneath it, in her careful 7-year-old handwriting, she had written, "We will be okay, Daddy." Marcus pressed his hand flat over that drawing and closed his eyes. The next morning, he did something he had never done in 5 years at Caldwell Distribution. He asked for help. Not from Pete, but from someone far above him, someone he had never spoken to directly, someone most people at the warehouse only knew by name and reputation. He wrote a letter. Not an email, not a text, an actual handwritten letter on a sheet of notebook paper, folded into thirds, and left with the front desk receptionist addressed to the CEO of Caldwell Distribution, a woman named Vivian Castora. He had heard she visited the Fort Worth facility twice a year. He had seen her once, briefly, 3 years ago, a composed woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and sensible shoes, walking the floor like someone who actually wanted to understand what she was looking at. He had nothing to lose. He explained everything, Renata's death, Zoe, the car, the $2,200, the fact that he had never missed a shift in 5 years, that he was not asking for charity but for a loan against his future wages, that he would sign anything they needed him to sign. He sealed the letter and told himself he had done what he could do. 3 days passed. Then 4. He borrowed his neighbor's bicycle and rode it to a gas station a mile away where a man named Terrence sometimes let people pay to use his personal truck for grocery runs. Marcus paid Terrence $40 he couldn't afford for a single ride to work on Friday. Pete docked him 2 days of pay for the absences and reminded him again about company policy. Marcus nodded, kept his face neutral, and went back to the loading dock where he worked until his back ached and his hands were raw. That evening, Zoe told him she'd told her teacher, Miss Faulkner, that they were going through a thing, and Miss Faulkner had quietly packed an extra snack into Zoe's bag every day that week without a word to anyone. Small kindnesses were the only thing holding the seams of Marcus's life together, and he collected each one like something precious. On the 9th day, a Wednesday, the morning Marcus was supposed to get paid and could finally start figuring out a real plan, his phone rang with an unknown number. The voice on the other end introduced herself as the executive assistant to Vivian Castora, and she asked Marcus if he was available to meet with Ms. Castora at the company's regional office at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Marcus stood in his kitchen in his work socks and said yes before the sentence was even finished. He borrowed a clean shirt from his cousin over video call. They held the phone up to their closets together and picked one that his cousin agreed to drop on his porch by noon. Marcus showed up to that meeting looking like a man who had put every ounce of his remaining dignity into a single afternoon. Vivian Castora was already in the conference room when he arrived. She looked exactly as he remembered, direct, unhurried, carrying the particular stillness of someone who had learned to listen long before she learned to lead. She had his letter on the table in front of her. She asked him to sit down, and then she asked him to tell her everything, not the summary, not the polished version, everything. So he did. He talked about Renata. He talked about the night she died and how he'd had to explain to a 5-year-old girl why mommy wasn't coming home. He talked about how he'd rebuilt everything from scratch, slowly, brick by brick, and how one broken transmission had knocked it all sideways. He didn't cry, but it was close. Vivian Castora listened to every single word without interrupting once. What happened next is the part of this story that people find hardest to believe, but every word of it is true. Vivian Castora did not offer Marcus a wage advance. She did not offer him a loan. Instead, she told him that she had called the mechanic at Greystone Auto that very morning, paid the $2,200 in full, and arranged for the car to be ready by Friday. She also told him that she had spoken to Pete personally and reversed the 2-day pay dock. And then she slid a single sheet of paper across the table, a recommendation for Marcus to be considered for a floor supervisor promotion that had been internally posted for 6 weeks and had gone unfilled. She told him his 5-year attendance record, his team performance reviews, and a comment a junior worker had made about him in an anonymous survey, that Marcus was the kind of boss who made people feel like they mattered, had already made the decision easy. She was offering him the chance to apply, and she was personally backing the recommendation. Marcus picked up his Honda Accord on a Friday afternoon with Zoe in the passenger seat, her feet not quite reaching the floor, her lunchbox on her lap out of pure habit. He sat behind the wheel for a long moment before starting the engine, just long enough to feel the full weight of the last 30 days settle and then lift. Zoe reached over and patted his hand the way he had patted hers 1,000 times before, and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. He got the promotion 4 weeks later. He framed Zoe's crayon drawing and hung it in his new office. There is a version of this story where Marcus Holt is just another person the system quietly swallows, another father too proud to ask for help, another worker too tired to hold on. But that is not the story that happened. What happened instead is that he wrote one letter, and one person chose to read it like it mattered. Because it did. Before the final word of this story, drop a comment below and tell us, has a stranger's kindness ever changed the direction of your life? We read every single one. If this story reached something inside you, if it reminded you that small acts of grace can rewrite someone's entire future, please like this video, share it with someone carrying a heavy load right now, and subscribe to Echoes the Stories. These are the stories worth telling. And you being here is the reason we keep telling them.